Welcome to today's session from Bhagavad Gita as it is. We are almost towards the end of the chapter 3 Karma Yoga. We will be covering from the verses 32 to verse 43. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Gum Karate Bhajanam Angum Langayate. Yatkripatamo Mande Shri Guru Dinam Tarinam Varmananda Madhavam Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram. Hari Om Tat Sat. So we are on verse 33 today. We begin from there of the chapter 3 Karma Yoga. Sadrisham cheshtate swasya prakriter chinanam Jnanavan api prakritim yanti bhutani nigraha kim karishyati. Even a man of knowledge acts according to his own nature, for everyone follows the nature he has acquired from the three modes. What can repression accomplish? Verse 34. Indriyas yendriyas yarthe raga dvesho Vyavasthitav tayorna vasham agachet tauhya asya paripantinav. There are principles to regulate attachment and aversion pertaining to the senses and their objects. One should not come under the control of such attachments and aversion because they are stumbling blocks on the path of self-realization. Verse 35. Shreyan swadharmo vigunaha pardharmarth swanushtitat swadharme nidhanam shreyah pardharmo bhayavaha. Even though faultily, then another's duties perfectly. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duties, for to follow another's path is dangerous. Verse 36. Arjunuvacha atha kena prayukto yam papam charati purushaha anichan api vashneya balada eva niyojitaha. Translation. Arjun said, O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? Verse 37. Kama esha krodha esha rajo guna samudbhavaha mahashano mahapapma vidhen namiha vairinam. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, It is lust only, Arjun, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. Verse 38. Dhume navriyate vaner yatha darsho malena cha yathol benavrito garbhas tatha tenedam avritam. As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust. Verse 39. Avritam jnananam etena jnanino nityavairina kamarupena kaunteya dushpurena analena cha. Translation. Thus the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. Verse 40. Indriyano mano buddhir ashyadhishthanam uchyate etere vimohyate tya esha jnanam avartya dehinam. The senses, the mind and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. Verse 41. Tasmatvam indriyani ado niyamya bharatarshavaha papamanam prajahiya enam jnana vijnana nashanam. Therefore, O Arjun, best of the Bharatas, in the very beginning curb this great symbol of sin, that is lust, by regulating the senses, and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. Verse 42. Indriyani paranyahur indriyebhya param manah manasastu para buddhir yo buddhe paratastu saha. The working senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind. And he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence. Verse 43. Evam buddhe param buddhva samastabhyatmana manam atmana jahi shatrum mahabaho kamarupam durasadam. Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind and intelligence, O mighty armed Arjun, one should steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, that is Krishna consciousness, and thus by spiritual strength conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. So yesterday Krishna was motivating Arjun that how he has to overcome the material attachments, and he has to perform the perfection in the karma yoga by renouncing the results of his karmas, his activities, and offering them to Krishna. So that was the only way he can curb the selfish motivation in his activities. And today we will continue from verse 33, and here Arjun will be asking few more of his dilemmas to Krishna, and Krishna will be answering them. So in verse 33, Krishna is telling Arjun that everyone in this world is acting according to the nature given to them, and everybody is helpless in front of their own nature, and this nature has been acquired after birth from the three modes of nature, as we know: goodness, passion, and ignorance. So everyone is acting helplessly with these three modes of nature acting on them all the time, and a person's nature is also given by the three modes of material nature. So Krishna is telling Arjun that just by trying to repress them, or just trying to falsely control your nature for some time, you cannot accomplish much. You can only curb yourself or curb your nature for only so long, but sooner or later the nature you have acquired from the three modes of material nature, modes of material nature is going to become prominent in your nature. So this is how you'll be acting. But once Krishna says to Arjun that once one is situated in the Krishna consciousness or on the transcendental platform of bhakti, the modes of nature, they start to leave the person. But unless one goes on to the platform of bhakti, the modes of nature won't leave the person. And Prabhupada says in the purport that in chapter 7, 14th verse, this will be confirmed by the Lord. We will read when we reach the chapter 7 in due course of time. So for anyone to get out of the entanglements or the clutches of Maya, Maya we should remember, also belongs to Krishna. And nobody can get out of the clutches of Maya. We can only get out of the clutches of Maya when we are able to have the causeless mercy of Krishna through his devotees, and then Krishna also is going to give us the mercy as he's giving the mercy in this month, which is supposed to be 1,000 times more than even the Kartik or the Damodar month. So on our own we cannot do much. If we think that we can control ourselves by doing some meditation or some motivational speeches we are hearing in the material world these days, because this is the very prominent thing, which is become like a norm of the day. People think that, oh, we will just go to some seminars or attend some webinars these days and our problems will go away. This is not going to happen like that. Even if you are trying to get help of the so-called people who are very much trained in these faculties of controlling your mind and everything, you might have some peace for a short period of time while you're trying to close your eyes and trying to empty your mind and meditate, but this is not something which has a lasting effect on you. You are helpless sooner or later. Sometimes the effect can be for 10 minutes. If you think you've got a stronger will, you might have control on yourself for a day or two, but sooner or later your real nature is going to come back as it was. But only by living our life slowly, coming to the mode of goodness, and then following the path of bhakti, following the path of Krishna consciousness, and remembering Krishna in every sphere of our life 24/7, only we can achieve the so-called freedom from the modes of material nature, because we will be dovetailing the modes of material nature into the service of Lord Krishna by remembering our regulative principles and following them, and also by chanting and hearing and remembering Lord's name. And in verse 34, Arjuna is further advised by Krishna that one has to control, like we just said, his mind and attachments and the sense objects, one's senses, and later one has to have control over the sense objects as well. It cannot be done in an artificial manner. When it has to be learned through the process of bhakti, and these attachments and aversions, they are the so-called stumbling blocks in the path of, on the path of self-realization, or in the path of bhakti. And only by following the regulative principles, by waking up early, by trying to go to sleep early so that you can wake up early to follow the morning programs as Prabhupada has given for everyone, which all the temples follow, and one can go and learn the morning worship programs from there. But in today's circumstances, one can see the online transmissions of your local temples, or you can see so many temples on Mayapur.tv, then there's Vrindavan.tv, and you can learn so much. But you have to be, first of all, in the mode of goodness to start with, and slowly, when you start waking up for the Mangal Aarti and trying to do your japa in the morning before 10 a.m. as much as you can, and then you can do the rest after coming from your office or work, or if you are working from home in today's situation of this pandemic which is taken over the world. So everything can be slowly learned, and gradually one can come to the properly to the path of bhakti. And this is how attachment to Krishna will be there, and once attachment to Krishna will be there, slowly the aversion to the material life is going to happen. Of course, association is very important. One has to have the association with the devotees who have devoted their life to Krishna, who have come into Krishna consciousness, and who have dedicated so many years of their lives into understanding the path of bhakti and practicing it. So one can advance nicely with them. Of course, in the beginning, everyone is a neophyte, is only a learner, a beginner, like they say in Sanskrit, Kanishtadhikari. And slowly with practice and following the regulative principles and chanting the rounds on your beads, you will learn how to, and of course studying the Bhagavad Gita and trying to understand the instructions which Arjuna has been given. Actually, Krishna has given to all of us through Arjuna. So we can also free ourselves from the entanglement of the sense objects. So this won't be an overnight process. Overnight process is only going to be with the person who has a very advanced temperament already in bhakti, unless a person is born into a family of the devotees from birth. But still it takes time, because it's not a magic. Krishna is going to make sure that Maya is going to judge us at every step of our progress in our bhakti, because bhakti is not a cheaply available commodity. It's the highest of the highest. I'm struggling to find the right word for it. What should I say? The gift from Krishna to all of us, and this gift is only available to the human species as well. So we have to persevere as well. We shouldn't become restless and try to be too eager to just understand everything and become like those advanced and devotees, and like our spiritual masters who have actually dedicated all of their lives, sometimes right from childhood, and they have gone through so many austerities and come to the path of bhakti, and they have learned the process of detachment and controlling the senses and everything, and they have come to the Krishna consciousness properly. So in verse 35, Krishna is further telling Arjuna that it is always better for a person to be situated in their particular platform of life and just perform their duties, rather than try to copy somebody else and trying to be doing somebody else's duties. He's been told that it is better to be doing your duties which are not in a very perfect, which are not being done in a very perfect way. So one shouldn't follow anybody else's path, because that is dangerous. So in this case, Arjuna, as we know, has been told by Krishna to go ahead and pursue the war, and that is his prescribed duty, because he's a Kshatriya. Prabhupada gives a nice example here, that in as Vishwamitra was originally a Kshatriya, but later he became a Brahmana, whereas Parshuram was a Brahmana originally, but later he acted as a Kshatriya. But this was in the transcendental stage. This is not that they just they were, one minute they were acting as Vishwamitra was acting as a Kshatriya, and suddenly he became a Brahman. This happened on a transcendental stage. This was not on a stage of some kind of their whim or some fancy. So on a transcendental level, on a spiritual level, on the level of bhakti, this could have been done by them, and this happened. But we as mere mortals, we as human beings, we shouldn't try to do anything like that, because that is not going to be good for us at all. In verse 36, Arjun is asking that, O descendant of Vrishni, this is how he's addressing Krishna, because Krishna belongs to the Vrishni clan, that how one is forced to do the sinful acts, even when one doesn't want to do, and it is like as if some kind of force is acting upon them falsely. So Arjun's question is very very genuine, as Prabhupada says, is a question which implies to all of us, all the living entities. And as we have been reading chapter 15 this month, that this material world is actually the perverted in the perverted form of spiritual world. It's upside down. So whatever nice layout is there of the spiritual world, and however the activities of the spiritual world are, in this world everything is upside down. It's completely opposite. It's completely perverted. So in spiritual world there is nothing as sinful up there, but here it's opposite. So we feel sometimes, all of us, at one or other stage of our life, that we don't want to act in such a way, but how come we are forced to act in such a way? So Krishna is reminding, but Prabhupada is telling us in the purport that the sinful actions are not forced by the super soul. That is the form of Krishna sitting in our hearts, but by the side of our souls, as if two birds on the same tree in our heart. And this is further explained in the next verse, which is verse 37. So Bhagavan says, Lord Krishna says to Arjuna now that lust is the biggest obstacle to bhakti, and lust has to be controlled if one wants to establish oneself on the path of bhakti. The endless desires which are unfulfilled bring about the anger in a person, and the anger which is in the mode of passion, it is born of mode of passion actually, and then this is going to bring about the lust, and this is very sinful, Krishna says, and this is going to bring the downfall of a person as well. So The lust comes when a person gets desires, anger, and lust. It all comes when one is born is born with the contact of the mode of passion, and this can become really out of control as well later on. And this is one thing. The lust is one thing which is actually devouring the whole world, which is the enemy of the world, Krishna tells Arjun. And this wrath is actually transformed into illusion. Wrath is transformed into illusion, and it carries on in the material world, and everyone is kind of lost in their own illusion, in their own quagmire of what should I say, their own dreams and fancies and their own whims. So unless and until one adheres to the instructions of Lord given in the scriptures, it doesn't matter which faith one pursues, because all the faiths, all the major religions of this world, the scriptures, they tell one thing, that a person has to realize themselves. They have to find the purpose of their life. So that is the only way one can think of going beyond the mode of ignorance, passion, and come up to mode of goodness, and then try to understand the path of bhakti and also follow it. Prabhupada has given example of Ravan as well, that how he became the greatest devotee of the Lord, because Hanuman, he became the greatest devotee of, he was the greatest servant of Lord Rama. He burned down the city of Ravan, the Lanka, and Hanumanji, he became the greatest devotee of the Lord. And also in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is telling Arjun to engage his anger, the wrath he is feeling at the moment in the midst of the battle for the annihilation of his enemies. So these bad qualities, if employed for a good cause, they can also change into Krishna conscious. Krishna is telling Arjun, so we can make these bad qualities also our friends, Prabhupada tells in the purport, if they will be employed in the service of Lord Krishna. In verse 38, Krishna tells Arjun that as fire is covered by the smoke, and as mirror is covered by the dust, or as an embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust. So we will see that some people have got more of the bad qualities than the others. So there is how the modes of nature are attacking a person, or attacking a person to behave in a certain way is also different. It's all upon our karmas and our desires from the past lives as well, or what desires and what kind of situation we are, or what kind of society we are, or what kind of or which times we are living in at the moment. Everything acts upon us. So Krishna is telling that this is something which is hindering the progress of all the entities. And Prabhupada tells in the purports that the living entities, among them trees are also the living entities. They are stood just like that in the nature. They haven't got any so-called covering, like we have clothes to wear and all that, because once upon a time in their past lives they had they were full of lust. So in this life they have been given this kind of body, so they can just stay, they can exhibit themselves nicely. And this is something which you don't understand when you start the study of the Bhagavad Gita, but slowly you get the realizations as you hear from the purports of Prabhupada, read them, and eventually listen to the spiritual masters and the gurus, and the analogies given by Prabhupada nicely explained to you. So Krishna consciousness, we can provide the Krishna consciousness even to the flowers and the trees and the vegetation outside by offering their produce to Krishna. So produce of the trees and the flowers and the fruits and the vegetables, once they are offered in the service of Krishna in the form of arti, in the form of garland, in the form of making or cooking the bhoga, so we are actually going to help even the vegetation and the plants and the trees as well in the nature, so they can also become Krishna conscious in their next life. So in Krishna conscious, everybody and anybody and everybody can be helped. So Krishna consciousness is such a beautiful process, or we should say the only process which can deliver us from this material life. But it has to be under the guidance of a spiritual master. We cannot just use our own mental concoctions and speculations and devise our own plan. We have to follow the process which has been coming on from Krishna in the disciplic succession or the parampara through the spiritual master to the disciples. In verse 39, now Krishna is reiterating the same point, that the living entity's pure consciousness is covered in the form of the eternal enemy, which is the lust, and which is never satisfied, and it makes a person burn, which burns like fire in a person, which agitates the mind of a person in the form of anger, the unfulfilled desires in the form of anger, and the anger in the form of lust, and the unfulfilled lust in the form of wrath, and wrath in form of the destruction of the society and the person as well. So there'll be unhappiness and complete dejection in a person, until a person keeps thinking that they are the enjoyer, they are the primary enjoyer, and they have the right to enjoy. Until and unless they keep thinking that they are the enjoyer, they will have this problem with the sense gratification and with the material world. So one has to remember that they are not the enjoyer, it's Krishna the enjoyer, Krishna the controller, Krishna is the one who has to be served with everything which is available in this material world to us in this life. So in verse 40, the senses, the intelligence, they are, and the mind, these are the places where the lust sits, and through the lust covers the lust, it covers the real knowledge of the living entity, and this makes a person bewildered. So if the intelligence is not in the goodness form of good, in the mode of goodness, or from mode of goodness, one is not pursuing the bhakti marg or the path of bhakti, the intelligence is going to be lusty of that person, and person will be very much identifying themselves with the false ego and with the matter, with the material world, and with their mind and with their senses. And unless and until this will be employed into the path of bhakti, into the service of Krishna, this problem is going to disturb the living entities. So a beautiful example Prabhupada gives in the purport is that if a person is identifying himself or herself with the body made of 3 elements, with his self, and who considers the byproducts of the body to be his kinsmen, to his family members, and who considers the land of birth worshipable, and who goes to the places of pilgrimage just to take a bath and not to have the association of the transcendental persons in that holy place or in that pilgrimage, is to be considered like a cow or an ass. In verse 41, Krishna is telling Arjun that therefore Arjun, he's addressed as the best of the Bharatas, that in the beginning one has to curb this great symbol of lust by regulating the senses. So that is why in Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada has reminded us of, has actually given us the 4 regulative principles, that they are the only way we can regulate the 4 senses. Our senses, whether it's working senses or the knowledge acquiring senses, and that is the only way we'll be able to destroy the lust, and by regulating it. And this is something which destroys the knowledge and hinders the path of the self-realization for the person. In the purport, Prabhupada says, quoting a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, 2nd Canto, 9th chapter, 31 verse, that the knowledge of the self and supreme self is very confidential and mysterious, but such knowledge and specific realization can be understood if explained with their various aspects by the Lord himself. So the instructions which are coming from the Lord, directly from the Lord, they can help the person, because the person, the self, the Atma, in each of us is part and parcel of the Lord himself. So who better to give the guidance for the soul than the proprietor of the soul, the controller of the soul, the one who is to whom the soul belongs. Ultimately, the soul has actually come from there and it's going back there as well. So he is the one who can give the knowledge of about the soul and how to go about realizing it, realizing the purpose of your life, and how to advance in it as well. And Prabhupada explains to us nicely that the lust is only the perverted reflection of the love of God. So actually in the spiritual world, the love of the God is there, but because this material world is the upside down reflection of that banyan tree, which is there in the spiritual world, this upside down banyan tree is actually showing the love of God, which is there in the spiritual world, as the lust, because it's the perverted or the upside down reflection of the love of God, which is natural for everything. So the nature of soul is Satchid Anand Vigraha. It is always happy, always full of knowledge, it's always blissful. But being in a wrong kind of situation, it is situated now, it is supposed to be, it is eternal, and it is supposed to be with the God, full of knowledge, full of bliss and eternal, but it is at the moment in the material plane, so it is acting in full of lust. So the love of God after the birth gets deteriorated into lust. It degrades. The love becomes lust. So under the noble so-called condition, Prabhupada says it's very difficult to transform it. It's only after coming to Krishna consciousness, following the regulative principle, doing the devotional service to the Lord, from any stage of life, a person can regulate their senses and understand why it is so important to learn, and then start into the Krishna consciousness journey. In verse 42, Krishna explains that the working senses are superior to the dull matter, mind is higher than the senses, intelligence is still higher than the mind, and the soul is higher than the intelligence. You know, the famous painting where you see, even at the beginning of this Bhagavad Gita session, sometimes I put on that picture, the cover of the Bhagavad Gita as it is, where in one of the editions they had that picture where Krishna is the charioteer, Arjun is the passenger, and there's 5 horses, the reins are controlled by Krishna, and there's chariot. So the chariot is the body, is actually our body, and the 5 horses are the 5 senses, and Arjun is the passenger, and Krishna is the charioteer will be the intelligence, the reins, they will be the mind, and super soul is sitting next to the soul, and that super soul is Krishna. He's just quietly watching and actually giving us the guidance as well. So sometimes when we are in some kind of dilemma, we hear a quiet voice giving us the guidance for what we should be doing, and we ignore that. That is the voice of Krishna. That is, and the notorious voice which tells us not to do the right thing, just to do what we think is right, that is the voice of our mind. So we have to try to control our senses, our mind through our intelligence, and to try to differentiate between the voice of super soul and our mind. The super soul is the one which gives you the right guidance, which is actually, if you're following the process of bhakti, you understand that what is the right moral ethic code of life, and what is the crazy code which your mind gives you all the time to live. And in the end, in verse 43, Krishna says that if you understand that you are above the material senses, mind and intelligence, you are at the level of soul. Krishna says to Arjun that, O mighty armed, you should steady your mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, that is by employing the Krishna consciousness, and thus by the spiritual strength of the Krishna consciousness you can conquer this enemy known as lust. So Krishna consciousness is a gradual process, and we have to restrain the senses and divert our senses to the spiritual platform to conquer the lust, and to chant the names of Krishna, think of Krishna, and by diverting and using the intelligence, and by realizing that we are not this body, we are this soul, we will be happy. And the lesson from the chapter 3 is that one should not give up their duties. So this is the conclusion of the chapter 3, Karma Yoga, or the discharge of one's prescribed duty in Krishna consciousness. And we will begin, next time we'll begin chapter 4 from Bhagavad Gita as it is. This has become a little bit longer session. Thanks for joining. and see you again. Hare Krishna.